America, Latin America. Please help me welcome our leader, entrepreneur, Ms. Betty Perez. Thank you so much for this call. Welcome to the call. Please say hello to everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris, so much for having me on. It's a total pleasure to be on today, and I'm looking forward to the convo.
Yes, yes. Well, before we get started, what does your day look like? What are you up to these days? I know we just had a very successful Riemann convention. So what are you up to after the chaos on your world, on your side? What are you up to, Miss Betty Perez?
Yeah. Oh gosh, we are on to the next convention. Really, that's really what we're on to. No, that's one of many things that we are working on right now. What's so great about Remon is there's always new things happening. There's always innovation, whether it's on the product end, whether it's on the systems end. So really, our eyes on just ensuring that the rest of the year is incredible as it can be, and then really focus on 2027 and beyond. Really setting up the foundation for it. I'd say this next chapter of Remon, we've been in business now for almost 4 years. It'll be 4 years in March. And so a lot that has happened, a lot that has been learned to really build, on and just make sure that the next 4 years are absolutely incredible. So lots happening.
Yeah, time does fly. I mean, in a blink of an eye, I feel like the next convention is going to be coming around
It will
already.
be here.
Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Definitely. So with that said, I want to kind of switch gears. Every interviewer that comes on our Team 1%, we start off with a few topics based on our announcements. But when I kick off the announcements, I start off with Riemann retreats. We just got back from Costa Rica several months ago.
Yeah.
It is a life-changing event for most planners, and we go through this feeling of like you don't want to go even though you qualified, you're excited, but you don't know what to expect. And then once you go, you're glad you went. And then when you come back, you have this deep, profound memory. So, to kick off this call, Miss Betty Perez,
Yeah.
I want to ask you, from your point of view as an industry professional, why Riemann Retreats is so important, why it's important, it's not just another trip, and why it's a part of the curriculum of team building. Can you please share your insight on why it's important, why everybody should qualify and go?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy you brought this up because Riemann Retreats, it's such a, I'd say, a cornerstone of our entire system. It's not just a trip, it's not just a place to have fun. Although I will say that the fact that it is a trip and it is fun, we hope you have fun. It's also a big aspect of it, and actually let me start there because I think it's the most obvious, right? Like when we talk about Riemann Retreats, this next year we're going to the Bahamas and we're looking at some really fun places in Europe and, other places for the future years. We try to make it something very experiential, something that is, it's just different. And really we look at places that are like bucket list places, right? I think everybody, it has these dreams of going to places like Dubai and to Paris and to the Bahamas. And, life is, there's a lot going on in each individual's personal life that sometimes we can't take these trips. And actually, I think it was Tracy Zimmer, many years ago, she talked about how like it's just these trips can be a dream come true. And being on a trip that you pay for yourself is a dream come true. The fact that, when you do have the ability to make the time and have the resources to go on these trips, like it's incredible. You have these memories with your family, but when you get it for free, like it's just that much better, and I remember when Tracy said that, and it's so true. You have this dream trip in which we make sure that the properties that we go to, you can also bring your family, right? So if you have kids and you have a spouse, like we want you to bring your family, we want you to bring your spouse. In our trip qualifications, there is space for more people than just yourself. And so, we advocate for that because we know how important it is for the family around you to support your business. This business and any business can be, has its challenges and it can be demanding. It requires time from you. And, we are very conscious that when you spend time on this Zoom like you are right now, you're not spending time elsewhere, whether it could be, things that could be happening in your family, you're spending time here. And so, these trips are such, I think, an important piece of the puzzle within our system for you to invite your family and to have these experiences that, are just so memorable that you're going to talk about forever. So there is that aspect of it's fun, it's memorable, it's a trip, it's a bucket list item. But also, I think obviously we all live in our own city, let alone our own state. The US is 3,000 miles coast to coast. Like we are, we don't get to see each other very often. Even you and I, Chris, we live in the same state, and I see you a handful of times a month, and that's a lot, right? Because you're here in the same state. But, I think when you come together with like-minded people, so this is your community and Remon, and you come together and you get to hear everybody's stories. Yes, the challenges that everybody goes through, and sometimes you just need to be in a place where you look at the person to your left, you look at the person to your right, and you're like, oh my gosh, me too. Like I went through that too, and it just gives you validation that you're on the right path. Because obviously, the people that are on this trip, they're winners. They've earned a trip. They've done enough to merit the trip to earn the trip. And so, when you're with a group of people that have also gone through the same challenges, I think there's some level of just validation that, the journey that you are on, whether sometimes seemingly it's not so great and sometimes seemingly it's really great, right? You just know that you're on the right path. So I think that's really important. So really just the camaraderie of being in an environment with like-minded people is so important, right? And then I would say the third piece, is we look at anytime we all get together, whether it's a convention, whether it's a Zoom, whether it's Remon retreats, we look at it as an event. So you best believe that, from the corporate side, we are looking to, hey, we're going to have hundreds of people together. Why don't we share some announcements? So this is really a great place to not just hear about announcements, things that will be happening in Remon in the future, like this past trip when we went to Costa Rica. I mean, we talked about all the new products. People there knew we were launching mascara, we were launching these lip liners and all of the things, right? So yes, you hear announcements, but I think also because it's a more intimate environment, you also get to hear why, how. We have different types of conversations in smaller rooms than we do in big rooms. Like convention is great, but obviously if you have thousands of people in one room, you're going to have a type of conversation that's going to be different if, it's only hundreds. And then we also have opportunities to break off into smaller, just smaller environments, more casual settings. And so I just feel like you really get to know the heart of Remon and the essence of Remon and the community, at these types of retreats. So, I think those
Yeah.
are three big points as to why.
Yeah, I believe it also is kind of like, how, you know, when certain people go through boot camp together, there's
Yeah,
a newfound struggle that they went through, and there's a bond that can't be undone, right? And I
totally.
believe, like, even if you're not on the same team, the whole
Yeah.
organization that goes on these Remon retreats were forged through those bonds of, character building, not giving up, right? And so
Yeah.
we all come to a place where, we come from different walks of life, but it's kind of understood we're going to the same place. So there's this understood like sorority or fraternity
Hmm.
amongst us, right? And
Totally.
some of those
Absolutely.
things carry on to lifelong friendships, as to like you and I, right? We met
Yeah.
in another company, but because
Hmm.
of that connection, because of the forging of the fire, the struggles we went through, even on different teams, but in the same organization, we remained friends for over 20 years. You get what I mean?
Totally. Totally.
And it's
Absolutely.
those retreats that forge the relationships,
Absolutely. It's gosh, anytime you get to spend time with someone or something, you're going to see them and understand them or it, in this case, the company differently. And
Yeah.
the more you spend time with somebody, you just develop that relationship. And to your point, these relationships can be lifelong relationships. I know for sure it's happened to me over the past 18 years that I've been in this industry. All of my friends are really from this industry because obviously I've just met some incredible people.
Yeah, and if you're in long enough, it's like you have lifelong friends you went to school with in childhood, but then you end up becoming closer with the people here because of the
Yeah.
struggles and the, that's crazy.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so great about having different types of friends or relationships because, we have different texture to life based on the things that we do, right? It's like I have my family life, I have my life as a sister, I have my life as an aunt, and then I have my life as, a business person, right? A businesswoman. And gosh, I say this lovingly in case she watches this. My sister understands me on all ends, but let's just say, I'm just take this example, right? Like she doesn't understand, she may not understand me within the business world, let's just say, as well as you do, right? And so you just having opportunities for like-minded people to get to know this version of you, in this case the
Yes.
business person of you. I think it's important because we go through certain things that we can relate to and we can help each other through. So yeah, it's really cool. And if my sister's
Amazing.
watching, she understands the business too. So
What's up, I want to ask you. Okay, so okay, I think we're done with the Riemann retreat part. Now let's dive into who the real Miss Betty Perez is. Because, on stage, at convention, public Zooms, we talk about briefly, where
yeah,
you're from and who you are, but we want to get to know the real Betty. Tell us your story. I know you're from Orange County, California,
yeah.
had a single mom. She gave everything in life so you and your sister could have a better life. Tell us your story, your upbringing, where you're from. Let's get to know the
Yeah,
real Betty Perez.
totally. Gosh, you started, I think where I should start, which I credit everything, back to my mother. For those of you who do know me, you know that she's been a very central part of my life. And so, yes, I grew up here in Orange County, California, actually in Santa Ana.
Mother
I
Day.
was yeah, just down the street. And, my mom, she was a single mother. She's from Mexico. She came here when she was 17. And, she just had it in her mind that my sister and I, we were going to have a totally different life than she had. And so, I was unborn at the time, but she always knew she wanted to have two daughters. It was something in her head, and, she totally manifested it. So, we grew up with her, and she was both my mom and my dad. She always put us through, she did the best. She put us through private school our entire life. I don't know how she did it, Chris. I have no clue. Like the math doesn't add up to me, but I think when there's a will, there's a way. And when you have a lot of love for somebody, you make things happen. And so she did that for us. And anyway, long story short, I knew what I wanted to do in life. I wanted to be a journalist. And that was really my career path for forever. And so after high school, going into college, San Francisco State University, I got a call one day from somebody who I went to high school with in ninth grade. Now, I went to three different high schools. That's a whole another story. I've always just had a mind of my own, and I've always spoken up. And being in private schools, sometimes they don't, you got to temper your opinions a bit. And I've never been one to temper my opinions. And so I went to three different high schools. And so from my first high school, for modern day here locally, um, somebody gave me a call and said, "Hey, Betty, um, I have an opportunity. I know you're going to college. Are you open-minded to making some extra money?" And at the time, being in three high schools, Chris, like I didn't even know who this person was. I was like, wait, who are you? What's going on here? But in the back of my mind, all I heard was, do I want to make money? And I was about to leave the nest, and go to college. And yeah, I needed to make extra money. So long story short, I said yes. And I came down to an office here in Irvine, just around the street from where the Remont office is at. And there, I met Tim Herr. I met you, and I met many other people that I still give a lot of credit to, that helped shape my career. And I got started in the business. I had never seen an environment in which people were so excited. Granted, Chris, I felt like I had a good education, up until that point. But when I walked into this room, they were doing a business opportunity meeting, and then later it was a Friday night training, kind of like this. So, I was in the physical version of this particular call that's happening right now. And Tim Herr, he was talking about the law of the lid, John C. Maxwell. And I'm super young. I'm 18 years old, however old I was. And I was like, my brain was just like, wow, like this is so cool. This is so different. I feel like I've always had an appetite for growing and learning. And I just, my cup really got filled that night and I decided I wanted to get started. And so, I forgot your question. I think I'm ranting, I'm rambling now. So yes,
Oh,
I'm
no,
from Santa Ana,
we
California,
no, we wanted
Orange
to get to know
County.
you, your
And
story, but this is perfect because what makes your story so amazing and your career, when we look back, even you're still at such a young age, is I feel like you got launched into this industry properly. You first started as a distributor, a planner. So you got to see the ins and outs of what planners go through. You experienced it just like Chairman On, right? Chairman On started as a distributor, right? Same thing with yourself. And I believe that's what makes you so
yeah.
valuable in today's marketplace because you know the mind of a networker. Time is on your side. You're like a young business prodigy, young lady. You've been featured in many, many publications for your success as well. But one thing I do want to ask you is if there's one thing that you learned as a distributor, as a planner, what was the one thing that benefited you the most?
Yeah, Tim always talks about it, and you do too. And I think this is just key to life, right? It's you can't get your lows get too low, and you can't get your highs get too high. And I think that's something that I've really adopted, from a really early age, and all the things that I have done is, obviously we all have emotions. I have emotions. But I think learning to understand that nothing is ever as bad as it seems, and nothing is ever as good as it seems to a certain degree. And just being focused on reps, I think this is a big thing for me is I got it. It's just about the reps. And what I mean by that, Chris, is whatever your practice is, right? Whether it's the business or whether, I like going to the gym. So let's just take the gym too as an example. I just know that if I want to master something, if I want to deadlift, 185 pounds or whatever the case is, right? If I want to, be Chris Kim hosting interviews on Zoom and being on stage and all the things, I just, I can get there. I just need more reps, meaning I just need more practice, And so going back to what I originally said, it can be, the question is what is in between you today and the reps, the more practice. And a lot of times that's emotion, right? Because it's like you called somebody and they said no, and you were like, oh, like this isn't going to work for me. Or you talk to somebody and they try to, just tell you why this isn't going to work. And now you're like, oh, why am I doing this? Right. And so I really think that, bringing it back to the business, the emotional aspect, of where you are today and where you want to be, that needs to be controlled so that ultimately you can get more reps. Because if you can just stay really consistent with your emotions and not get too excited about something, like let's just say you sponsored somebody and they just seem like they're the next director, but at the end of the day, only time will tell. You just got to stay consistent. Don't get too excited so that you stop, doing your routine or, just your DMO, your daily method of operation. So, yeah, I think that's something that I've learned, and I can't say that I'm always 100% on. Obviously, I'm human, but I do try to be very mindful of just getting a hold of my emotions so that I could just do more of what, I need to do to get to where I want to go.
Well, when I see you, when you lead, you could tell the experiences you had, in your career, just with the way you talk, your posture and things like that. So I want to move on to the next topic. What I want to pay homage and respect to, most people don't know this, but I had my first seven-figure year because of Miss Betty Perez. I need to reiterate that I had my very first seven-figure year because of Miss Betty Perez and a phone call that she gave me 15 years ago. So literally the phone call I got from Miss Betty Perez is what completely changed the course of my career. So we're going to go back to, I believe this is 2011. Okay. Now
Yeah,
I get a call in 2011 from Miss Betty Perez to Tim, her, and myself, right? And she explains that, she's on the cusp of launching a skincare company. Now, Betty is 19 years old at the time. Okay. This is 2011. Okay. I want you to understand the context. Okay. Tim and I are coming off of a multi-million-dollar sales run. We had a really big run. Okay. Excitement, income, ego is high. Okay, our ego is high. And I have to reiterate, Betty's the one that humbled me and put my ego in check. Okay, and I'm gonna go through this story. So this was about 2011, and Betty had this opportunity to launch a skincare company with a bunch of entrepreneurs at the time. And some of you might know this brand, but they were known to sell skincare in the kiosk, and they would come as kind of solicit you. Let me show you something amazing. Like it's these guys, right? But Betty started working with these guys. Started doing like massive amount of sales, and then she convinced this company, hey, why don't you transition to direct sales? And the company, instead of being skeptical, they said, well, who do you know? And at that time, Ms. Betty Perez gave me and Mr. Tim Her a call about a new company launching. Now, for those of you that know us, Mr. Tim Her is Tigger. He's the optimist. And I'm not Eeyore, but I'm a realist. Okay, I'm pretty practical, right? And when Betty called us, I don't know what I don't know, but Mr. Tim Her, he's been in the industry for a very, very long time, way before I was. And Mr. Tim Her's posture was always maintaining an open mind, right? And I was having a little bit of an ego because it wasn't necessarily about Miss Betty giving us a call, but it was about she's launching skincare and makeup, right? So at the time, now ignorant Chris, what do I know about skincare? What do I know about beauty? What do I know about purchasing power? Nothing. I was not humble, okay? But Betty gave us a call, and I was quite arrogant. I was like, why are you telling us about this opportunity? We're dudes. What do we know about makeup? And I was having this ego. And there was a time where Miss Betty absolutely humbled me because she said something that really woke me up. And it was a real life lesson that I keep with me today. And she said, you know what, Chris? These executives, they asked me, who do you know that's the best at selling that could probably move these products? And Betty said, well, then I thought of Tim and Chris. And when they said that, I decided to give you a call because you guys are the best that I know. And when I told them you're the best, as a friend, you could at least take the flight, come here for me, get a nice steak dinner, get treated nice, and go home with a gift of skincare products you could give to your wife. When she said that, it was the most humbling, regretful thing I ever felt in my life because it was a compliment and I couldn't see that, right? So when she said that, a profound feeling came over me, and it was like, humble yourself, Chris, humble yourself. Who do you think you are? And I took a leap of faith and I took that flight. And when I got there, I remember Miss Betty Perez giving me a demo on these products. And I remember these products weren't the cleanest, the best, but they were highly demonstratable. And when Miss Betty Perez was demonstrating these products on my hand, she said, Chris, let's go back a few years when we were in the same company together. Can you imagine if we had products like this, the type of sales we would put up? And that's when it dawned on me. And that's when the light bulb clicked. And from there, I believe I got sold silly. I was so excited. I was compelled. And I made a decision that day to say yes. And the rest is actually history. We went on to sell over $1 billion in sales. I had the biggest run of my career thanks to this young lady. So, on this call publicly, I want to thank you. But I also wanted to give you the respect that it was due because you thought of us. And boy, what a run we had. But on your side of the story, tell us about what that was like at the age of 19, starting a company, doing over $1 billion in sales. Tell us what that journey was like for you at the age of 19.
Yeah, it's crazy. I've said this often. I think if you could put youth in a capsule and you could take that every day, like that would be incredible because, I look back, right, to that time of my life. And it's pretty crazy. The truth is, Chris, I just I didn't know anything. Like I didn't know what I was doing. I had been in the industry for about a year and a half. The company that I started with coming out of high school, going into college. So I had been a distributor for a year and a half, but this is, why everything in life is truly just, it's a chapter to the book. I met you, I met Tim, I met you guys there, and other
Met
people
Danny.
as well. Danny, I met Danny there. Some, just very, very influential people in my life. And so, that year and a half led to an idea of starting a direct sales company.
At
And
19 years old.
yeah, at 19, like I definitely didn't know. But I think what's so important is just being open-minded, saying yes, and staying really gritty. So when you ask how was it, it was gritty. I think that's the best word I can use because, when we started, it was three co-founders and we did, we were doing everything. We were doing customer service, we were doing sales, we were doing marketing. I don't know that we were doing any of it really well, but at the end of the day, it was good enough. It was good enough to get doors open and to get the website launched. And I think in life, it's about finding people that are better than you. And hence, you and Tim, you guys came and got started and, together, we did some pretty incredible things. But yeah, looking back, I think it was just saying yes, never pretending like I knew exactly how to make something happen, but just saying yes, staying really gritty and staying really faithful to the process. One of my favorite books right now is it's Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. It's a story of Nike, and in that book, he says something has resonated a lot with me. Phil Knight was not like this super like optimistic entrepreneur, like I'm going to build the biggest shoe company in the world, like let's go do this. Like not at all. He was very skeptical and very negative. That's his personality based on what I read in the book. And he said that at the very end of the day, when he started Nike, he had a vision and sure he was excited, but at the end of the day, if he was going to fail, he wanted to fail fast. And what he means by that is he wasn't going to go to sleep at night not feeling good about knowing that he did everything he could to make that day successful. Like he wanted to make sure that if there was 10 things that needed to be done, he was going to do all 10 things really more as just like going through the motions, going through the process, getting it done. And at the end of the day, he was going to feel good that he did it. And if it didn't work, it didn't work. He did everything he could. So his attitude was if I was going to fail, if Nike wasn't going to become successful, I was going to do all the things that I had to do as fast as I could, go through the process, and we'll see what happens. And I think a lot of it with me was like that. It was, gosh, okay, one thing for sure is I'm not going to look back and regret not having done something, regret not having made the phone call, regret not having gone to the meeting, regret not having belief. I was going to do all that and we were just going to see what happened. And, thankfully, obviously things worked out well. But it was a gritty process. It was a moment of just having a lot of belief, not necessarily in myself, but just belief in, gosh, when you put your energy, your mind, and your heart into something and you do everything that you have to do, I think, Chris, only good things can happen. And I think that's just something in life that I try to think of and do is I just got to put everything I have into it. Only God knows what's going to happen, but I sure as heck am not going to look back and say I didn't do everything I could. So.
Yep. All on faith. Okay, so in this company, regarding this chapter in your life, okay, I believe you had like a 12 year run. Tim and I had like a 14-year run. But, I believe after 12 years, you exited the company. You had a very successful buyout as a co-founder, co-owner, and you had an exit strategy. You had a multi-million-dollar buyout. But after that buyout, you were scouted by a billion-dollar company that was the fastest to a billion, and you were scouted to be a North America president. What was that experience like after building, a company over a billion in revenue, having a buyout, and you're still in your young 20s, and then now you're scouted to another billion, not a million with a B, a billion-dollar company to be the head president of North America. What was that experience like? And share with us, your journey on that.
Chris, it was scary. I would say that's probably the right word. It was really different. It was really scary. My position at that company was very different than my position at the company that I started. The company I started, I was a founder, I was an owner, and then I was transitioning to being an employee. So, I only bring this up because I think that a lot of us sometimes, we start somewhere and we go through a transition, and things could be very different than they were before, and it could be, very scary. Like you're performing a role that you've never done before, or just in a different context. And that was the case for me, and I think learning to adapt to that was interesting for sure. But one of the main things that I was excited for was, this company, like you said, they were the fastest to 1 billion ever in the industry, and they did, over 1.5 billion consistently for 8 years, consecutively. And I was just really excited to work in a company of that size. They had over 800 employees. They had over 30 different offices, and I wanted to see what an operation like of that size, how it worked, how it ran, and how it was done. And the company that I co-founded, we got to about 300 million a year consistently, and then did that consecutively for many years. But this is a company I was doing 1 billion plus, and so
Here.
I really looked at it like, what can I learn? Not what, it's really more how much can I learn? And it was incredible. I really do credit that company to just helping me learn a lot and seeing the way a company of that size runs. And it's very different, and then also just getting to know more of this industry. I think this industry is so incredible. The opportunities that the industry gives to people of all walks of life who really want to get gritty and, go through the process. So yeah, it was scary. It was different, but at the very end of the day, it's like once I stepped into the role, I just wanted to do my best. I really did. I wanted to do my best. And so again, when you just give 100% of yourself and you're super passionate and you're excited, you're only going to win. You never know how that a story is going to end. You don't know if it's the ending or the result that you signed up for. But what I will say is you're always going to win. You're always going to learn. You're going to meet some incredible people. And that's exactly, what happened with me, at that company. It was incredible.
Amazing. Okay, so let's move on to your beginning with Riemann. But before we talk about your beginning with Riemann, there's a lot of questions I want to ask about your meeting with Chairman On, what it was like with Paula Scheer, Frederick Bertin, that whole journey. But also, I want to talk to you about your relationship with Danny Bay, Mr. Danny Bay, your friendship with him, your personal friendship, and how you got scouted into Riemann and how all that unfolded.
Yeah, totally. I met Danny when I was 18. So, back at the very first company I ever got introduced to in this industry. Danny, as he was already. So when I was getting started in the
He
industry,
was the man when
day
we
one for
arrived.
me.
He was the man when
Yes,
we
he already
arrived.
was. So Danny's always been the man as far as I know, right?
Yeah,
It's
me
never
too.
been any different. So he was at the very top of that company. He was a senior vice president. And I think it was right around that time that Danny eventually, like he was so good at what he was doing that they transitioned him into being the vice president of Asia for this company. And it was a nearly $1 billion organization as well. And Danny was the person who helped them launch Asia very successfully, right? So I've known Danny since then. And then like you explained, I eventually left that company to be a co-founder at the company I started, and so our paths, I went my way, Danny went his way. You and Tim were a part of that company I co-founded. Yeah, but the really awesome thing about Danny, I think anybody that knows him personally, is Danny's just a good person. He's a good human. And so as we were doing our own thing, he was always super supportive. He would check in from time to time, via social media or whatever the thing was. And, Christy was always like congratulating us on our events and the success we were having. Danny's just always been a class act, right? And so we've just kept in touch, and that happened through the years. When I was working, at the company before Remon, I think that's probably when Danny and I had a conversation after we hadn't had like a full conversation, just, besides social media. And we were just like, hey, like what's happened? It's been like 10 years. And Danny was catching me up on all the things that he was doing. And I was living in Florida at the time and catching him up on, what I was doing. And we were just like, hey, like fist bump, like that's so great that, we've kind of gone our own ways and done well, thankfully. And so stayed in touch. And then in 2022, yes, it was 2022, Danny told me that he was being recruited to help start this company called ďériman. And I had never heard of it. And so I was like, oh, that's great. What's their story? And he sends me a link, and it was to the DSN Top 100 and ďériman number 23. Number 23 out of the top 100 companies in the world of direct sales. And I was amazed because, Chris, the company that, I co-founded, that we basically co-founded, we got to like number 56. And, you know, Chris, I know how hard that was, right? Like it was hard. It was so hard to get to the level that we did. And so to see a company that had only been in business, I think at that time, gosh, for what, 4 years out of just South Korea, this is 2022, was already number 23 on the top 100. I said, hey, tell me more. Tell me about this company. So he tells me that, they've done nearly $1 billion annually out of just South Korea. And you and I, thanks to you, the company that, we started, it was majorly successful in South Korea. So you and I, specifically you, had already had experience doing business in South Korea. And I know that it's a very Korea, one of the things I really appreciate about Korea is they really take care of their consumers, right? They take care of their members, their community. And so to make it in the industry in South Korea, it's not easy because there's a lot of regulation, and I applaud regulation. There's a lot of regulation. And so you really got to be a good one to make it big in
To
Korea.
that
And so
size, to that
that
success.
size, and so yeah, it was incredible to hear that this company did nearly $1 billion out of just South Korea. And so they wanted him to be the liaison to the rest of the world. They wanted Danny to be the one to help him expand globally. And so, that's when he said, well, what about you working as the help us launch North America? And so at the time, I was in the company I was in. It was, it was a big company. I was happy. And we just kind of stay in touch. He would pepper things in, send me what was going on. And eventually, I met with him and the CEO, and I and they kept saying they were different. And so ďériman's different, we've got plans to go global, and we're going to start in the US and all the things. And I just finally, I've become over the course of time a major skeptic. I'm always asking questions. I'm super skeptical. Like I need proof. I need receipts, as the kids say. And so, I just started asking questions like, tell me if you keep saying you're different, like tell me why you're different. Everybody says that. Tell me why you're different. Chris, I've talked about this at length. There's so many things that ďériman has done. It's not that they've just done it, but they've done it so early on. Like they have the lab, right? They have the patented, plant, and now many other things, right? Now we have other heritage ingredients.
War
They
chest,
had
war
plans.
chest of assets.
Yep. They had plans for the smart farm. So without going into all the details of all the things on how ďériman is different, I think you've got some other videos we've done on that. It was really the mindset of we're not here to just build a network marketing company, and that's great. That's great in and of itself. But they truly wanted to bring something different to what network marketing, to bring a brand to the world, a brand that was honoring the tradition of Korean skincare, a methodology of caring for your skin, putting this beautiful tradition in a bottle. And they were just dead set on making sure that the products that we deliver, that this was the best products that you could get for the money that you're going to buy. That what you're getting in each bottle, it really is truly, what you think you're going to buy, right? And so it was all about the results. And to me, it was so much emphasis on the product, the formulation, the integrity of the formulas, the quality of the products, the results. Like the whole conversation was about that. And of course, just the honor that they had towards the distributors too, because at the very end of the day in direct sales, like we are nothing without our distributors, but you need both. Like you need to have a good product in order to make a distributor's, job, career easier, I'd say, right? Because if you have a good product, you're going to have confidence, so you're going to have an easier time sharing it. If you don't have a good product, then we are in essence like, that's just not honoring your friends and family too. And so it was just this mindset of truly creating the best, and they just wanted to do things the right way. They just told me from the get-go, like, we want to buy a building in the US. We want to show the American community that we are here to stay. We want to do things the right way. And they were just so open. They were also a group of people that weren't coming to Danny and I saying, hey, we know how to do it. We've already done 1 billion out of South Korea. We at the time, Chris, 2022, the active cream was the #1 most selling cream in all of South Korea, not just in direct sales, but like compared to all all the brands, which I mean, again, it's huge, right? And so they could have had an ego, like they've done well, and they could have come to Danny and I and said, hey, like, this is what we want you guys to do. Just go do it in the US. But they were like, hey, how do we do this? How can we make this happen? Like, teach us, lead us. And it was just such a beautiful, it was a beautiful attitude and mindset that, when finally, the we came to the conversation of if whether I'd be a part of this or not. I just knew in the back of my mind, Chris, not really the back of my mind, the front of my mind, I just knew that Riman was going to be a story that everybody was going to know about in the US. I knew it. I knew it without a shadow of a doubt. And I just thought, gosh, like, if I have the opportunity, honor to be a part of that, like, how cool would that be? And, yes, I got started. And I will tell you this, Chris, and, I've shared it with others, to be a part of a startup at that point in my career was not something I was super jazzed about, nor do I think I would have done it in any normal circumstance. And by normal, I mean the way most, direct selling companies get started, and all the power to them. We all, start somewhere, right? But, it just, I've been super blessed. I've gotten really lucky. I've worked really hard. And I just felt like I was at a point in my career where, I didn't want to be with a startup where, they were just putting the resources together to create all the things, the
Just barely
product, the
getting
pack.
by.
I wasn't in that space. And so, but Remon came with so much that even
Firepower, so
though,
much firepower.
yeah, even though it was a startup, I just said in the Western world, I just knew, like, that everybody was going to resonate with such, not just a beautiful story, but I will say this, a real and a true story that Remon is. And so, I got super lucky to say yes.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes
Yep.
left, but I want to talk about two key takeaways, okay? First one, please tell us your experience meeting the iconic Paula Shear and what that project was like. And the second one is, what's the future of Riemann and, your vision, and then we'll close out. But, let the audience know what
Yeah.
that journey was like meeting Paula Shear. Give us some insight about that.
Yeah, that's one of the super cool things about working at Remon is because Chairman On is always looking to get better. He is, he really does take inventory. Like, Remon really does take inventory of what do we do really well and what are others better at doing those things than us, right? And so let's outsource what we cannot be the best in the world at, and let's do the things that we're going to be the best in the world at. And so one of that came to, to packaging and design, and by the way, I think Remon does a pretty good job. A lot of the packaging is done by Remon itself. But, Paula Scher, as, many of that have been with us, if not, just Google her. Like, her work is hung up in the MoMA in New York. She had a Netflix documentary on her. Like, she's iconic when it comes to the design world. And, she is as iconic as it gets, when you picture in your mind, like, what's that movie? The Devil Wears Prada, Miranda is
Meryl
right.
Streep, Meryl Streep,
Meryl Streep, I forget her name in the movie though. Is it Miranda?
Miranda.
Miranda, right? Like, she's kind of, if Paula, if you're watching this, I mean this with a compliment. Like, she's kind of like a Miranda. She's kind of like an Anna Wintour in the world of design. She's iconic. She carries herself as such. When people, like, we were in the office, the Pentagram office in New York, and when she goes around the room, like, it's it's Paula. Like, she's walking by, like, okay,
The queen
everybody.
is coming.
Yeah, the queen is coming, So she was incredible. And I remember the very first time I met her, we had a discussion on, why she was working with Remon, because she is working with everybody. I mean, gosh, like some of the most famous brands in the world, she has worked on and is working with, and at the time was working on. And then also she's working on Riman. And she just, I'll never forget it. She just said, I really think that you guys have such a great story. You have a true story. It's very clear that Riman is super passionate. And I do think that Riman could be, one of the biggest, if not the biggest K-beauty company in the world. And so she said, I want to be a part of that. And so I just, it was pretty awesome. So when you ask, what is the vision, for Riman, I will just kind of piggyback on what Paula said, which is I do believe that Riman will be the biggest, largest K beauty company in the world. Not just in direct sales, but I think in the world. And, the reason why I get excited about that is because, Chris, I've been in skincare since I was, 19, right? I've been in skincare for a really long time, and I love skincare, not just for what, because it makes your skin nicer and all the things, but I just like what it does to our confidence, to a woman's confidence. I think about 18-year-old me, 19-year-old me, 20 some year old me, and I just know that, as a woman, like I would say, at least for me, okay, I'll only speak for myself actually, like our confidence is developed over the years. Some of us start more confident, but with time, knowledge and experience, your confidence develops. And, confidence is something that's so powerful. In my opinion, it's kind of, it's a superpower, because the more confident you are, the more you're going to speak up, the more things that you're going to do. And as you start doing more, then you start meeting a version of yourself that you didn't even know was there, and that person can be pretty darn cool. And I just, I want that for every young girl. I want that for every woman, regardless of age and time. I think we all go through moments where, we're more confident, we're less confident. But, I think anything that we can do that helps bring out that confidence, I love. And I think that skincare does that on such a poetic level. I think I remember there was a time in my life, Chris, where I wouldn't go to the store without makeup on. It was like if I woke up, I would put on makeup. And now, fast forward, I could care less if I have makeup on or not. Like I will go to the store, I will go everywhere. Most of the time, actually, I won't be wearing makeup, and I do love our makeup, but I just love like to be comfortable in your skin. I think it's fun, and I look at our products like our products are so incredible. They're real, they're true. They are, while K-beauty is trending, we're not a trend, we're a tradition, and I just want to bring this to every corner of the world through the most incredible industry in the planet, which is direct sales. This industry changed my life. It has allowed me to do things that I could never have imagined. I didn't become a journalist. I ended up in network marketing, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Sure, it's been gritty and there's been challenges along the way, but anything worth doing is going to be gritty, and you're going to have challenges along the way. But it's been a total blessing, and I just want Riman to be, a company that shows more people who typically would say no to network marketing. They're like, I don't want to do anything
Exactly.
like that. But then they meet Riman and they say, well, this is different. This is really, really different. And now that person is a part of this industry and gets to, experience the beautiful things that network marketing can do for them, and, just make themselves more proud. So yeah, I just, we're on a mission, and it's really fun.
Amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, you just heard it directly from the source. Let's give Miss Betty Perez a shout out. Let's show her some love. Miss Betty Perez, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to seeing you again at HQ, the next convention. In closing, just say some words of encouragement and we'll close out. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being on. Thank you for giving us your time. And I can just, I'll tell you this. We are so grateful that you're a part of Remon. We do not take for granted the fact that you are here, and we are working every single day tirelessly to make this the best opportunity to truly make you proud. I just think, as I said earlier, this industry can help you develop and become more. And ultimately, you end up doing things that you never would have thought. and you meet a version of yourself that is different, a version of yourself that is cooler, wiser, all the things. And I think it's just so powerful. I think, at the end of the day, we only have one life. And I think it's our job, to go out there and honor ourselves by being the best version of us. And we need to continue to do things that bring out the best version of us. So, keep at it. The fact that you're on this call right now, you are on the right path. Get on more calls, come to more conventions, go to Riman retreats, do all the things and enjoy the process, get the reps and make it happen. So thank you so much.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was our general manager, Ms. Betty Perez, coming to you from Irvine, California. We will be seeing you guys next week. Next week, we have an action-packed interview. We have top producing director, Ms. Jen Barsamian, ready, locked and loaded to share her story. So with that said, thank you, everybody, for hopping on tonight. Ms. Betty Perez, thank you, and have an amazing weekend. We'll see you guys next week. Thank you so much. We'll see you at the
Thank
top. God
you.
bless. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Recording stopped.